Thank you for joining Oasis Solutions today as we present tips and tricks on Sage 100 Accounts Receivable. The webinar today and the topics that we are going to cover come from questions that we receive through our help desk, and also things that if you've had changes in personnel, that maybe those facts didn't get passed along to the new person, or you may be wondering why Sage doesn't have a particular feature, and it could be something as simple as that feature has not been turned on within the setup module. So we're going to look at several things today, and I will start going through them. And the presentation today is being done in Sage 100 version 6.0, which is also the 2018 version. So what we're going to start with is we're going to go into Accounts Receivable, and we're going to go into the setup, and we're going to go into the Accounts Receivable options. So within those options, we are going to take a look at a couple of different things. First of all, you will notice that actually, let me step back just a second. A lot of clients use Accounts Receivable only, and other clients use Accounts Receivable and Sales Order. So a lot of times we get questions on, well, why would you use Sales Order to do your billing instead of Accounts Receivable? And the reason for that is that Sales Order is tied into your inventory management. So if you're using inventory and you're tracking quantity on hand and you're wanting to track your sales, then you would use the Sales Order module to do your invoicing. The Sales Order module also allows you to do quotes, enter sales orders to provide information for your warehouse to pick, pack, and ship before you do invoicing. You still have to have the Accounts Receivable module because that's where your customer master file is located. So you can use AR standalone if you're a service business or you don't need to track inventory, then you can use Accounts Receivable for your billing. And have miscellaneous item codes or miscellaneous charge codes. But if you're using the inventory management module in Sage, then you would be using Sales Order as well. So in the AR options, we are going to take a look at the additional tab, and we're going to talk about the open item or balance forward. When you install Sage and set it up from scratch, or if you set up a brand new company in Sage and you're not copying over the setups from another company within the system, the open item or balance forward is going to default to the word mixed. So you do want to make sure that you go in and you're changing that to open item or balance forward. The difference between the two is balance forward is it tracks your open invoices up until the point that you do period end processing, and then it just lumps the balance forward on the history of that client. So if they had 15 open invoices totaling $1,500, once you do period end processing, it is going to bring forward that balance forward and just show that they owe you $1,500. And when they start sending checks for those 10 invoices, you're not able to apply that cash receipt to a particular invoice. You can only apply it to the balance itself. Open item actually keeps those invoices separated. So if you have 15 invoices out there and they send a check for the second invoice, then you can actually apply that payment directly to the invoice versus the quote balance forward. If you have it set to mixed, it means that your customers can be either open item or balance forward. So setting up a new customer, they will default to open item, but if someone accidentally changes it to balance forward, once you've started having transactions on that client, you cannot change the type back to open item. So it's always good to go in and take a look at that. I'm personally not aware of any of our clients that use the balance forward any longer. So if you know that you're never going to use balance forward, just always make sure that you have it set to open item, and then you have nothing to worry about. The second field on this screen is days to retain paid invoices. This also ties into the period end processing. So this field can be up to 999 days. So when you, at the end of the month, when you go in to do period end processing in Accounts Receivable, part of the process internally is that it comes and it looks at this field to see how long you want to retain those paid invoices. If it finds invoices that were paid more than 999 days ago, it is going to then purge them off of your customer screen. They will still remain in an inventory history file, but they will no longer show up on the client. So make sure that you're keeping this for a sufficient amount of time. Personally, I recommend keeping it as long as you can. We've had some individuals that didn't know what this field was for, or maybe they never did period end processing, so their invoices were always there. Someone changed this to 0 days and then did a period end processing, and then basically the result would be any paid invoices are going to be removed from that customer maintenance screen. So, and the same concept applies anywhere within Sage where it asks you how many days or how many years you want to keep history on a particular item. The period end processing is what causes that to purge the information. Okay. On the right side of the screen, we're going to just talk about this briefly, but to make you aware that if you have a sales force, that you can actually track commissions based on a salesperson by salesperson basis. And so if you want to use salesperson reporting or commission reporting and actually track commissions and pay commissions for your sales, then this box needs to be checked. If you do check this box, then every customer that you set up is going to have to be assigned a salesperson. So it will not let you finish, if you're going in to set up a new customer and you leave that field blank, it will not accept it until you've filled in a salesperson. In many cases, you may have a sales team, but then also maybe the owner does sales and they don't take a commission. Or you have counter sales where you have walk-ins and any of those counter sales do not result in a commission for anyone, but your outside salespeople would receive a commission. So how folks get around that is that they will set up maybe a house account as a salesperson and have the commission rate at 0%. So that your walk-ins, when you're doing an invoice, a sales order or a sales order invoice, the salesperson you would change it to the house account. Versus if your outside sales makes a sale, when you're doing that sales order or the invoice, you would tie that particular salesperson to that invoice, and then it would calculate their commission. If you are tracking commissions, you can tell it whether or not you want to pay the commissions on paid invoices only, meaning do you pay commissions on the total sale regardless of whether you collect the money from the customer, or do you calculate that commission at the point that not only the sale is made, but the client has paid that invoice? And I would say that most individuals only pay commissions when the customer has actually paid the invoice, but that's what this box is for. And then also you can determine if the calculation of the commission is going to be based on the net invoice or the gross profit. So you have that option as well. And then you have update commissions to other modules. And what that will do is if you have the payroll module in Sage and your salesperson is an employee, then you can actually link that salesperson number to their employee number and run through a process, and it will bring that commission information in dollars into the payroll data entry so that they're paid through payroll. If your salespeople are maybe commission only and they're contract folks, they're not technically employees, then you can also link them to a vendor number, and then it will bring in that commission information into an accounts payable invoice, and then you would pay them through AP. So you do not have to do that, but you do have the option of being able to link those salespeople to those other modules. You certainly can just not have it integrated with any other module, run your reports, and then do a manual entry in AP or in payroll. So it's certainly up to you. So wanted to talk to you about the commissions. If you're not using commissions and it's something that you're interested in learning more about, just give our help desk a call, and we'll be glad to walk you through the process or answer any questions that you might have. The next tab that I'm going to go to is credit. And this is where you can actually do credit limit checking on your clients. So you can have it look at the customer's credit limit, which is actually a number that you're going to key into the customer maintenance. There's a field there for credit limit. You can base it on the aging category. So if it's going to look at what they owe you for their credit limit and see whether or not they've met that threshold, or you can have it check both. And you can also have it bring up a warning if they're close to meeting their credit limit or exceeding their credit limit, I should say. And then you can actually put in the dollar amount. Now, if you'll notice, these fields are grayed out for me right now. That's because I have the credit limit checking set to none. If I change this to any of the three bottom categories on my drop-down, it's then going to open this. You can also have it include open orders in the customer's credit limit. So if you're using the sales order module and you have 3 open sales orders in addition to 15 open invoices, it's going to take a look at all of those when it's determining whether or not that client is getting close to their credit limit. You can have it give you a warning if the based on the aging category as well. You know, so if they have past due accounts that are 90 days or more, it's going to give you a warning. And then also you could say if the aging category balance exceeds a certain amount. So you may want a warning if, you know, if that client already owes you $5,000, you want a warning to pop up if you're going to do a new invoice or a new sales order for that client. It doesn't mean that you can't continue with that process, but it does come up and give you a warning. And you can also manage through the security settings if that salesperson has permission to override and continue on with the invoice if that client has met their credit limit or is over their credit limit, or if you want there to be maybe a management that has override approval capabilities. So again, you don't have to do credit limit checking or assign credit limits to your customers, but if you choose to, this is where you can set up the parameters on what you're wanting to track. So now we're going to move to the History tab. And there's one area in the History tab that I think is really important to think about and to determine what type of history and I guess more of an audit history that you're wanting to track on your customers. And the setting is the customer changes to track. You have none, you have all, you have deletions, additions, or changes. What this field does is if you have this set to all, which is my personal preference, I feel like if you're taking the time to track the changes that are made, you need to track all of them, not just certain changes. What this will do is any changes that occur to a customer master file. The customer calls you and they have a change of address, and you go in and change their address in the system. It's going to record that you've changed their address. If maybe you do have credit limits and you want to increase a customer's credit limit from $5,000 to $10,000, it's going to track that you've made that change. If you are tracking additions, which is included with the all, when you set up a new customer, it's actually going to record that you have set up a new customer. If you delete a customer or merge one out of the system, it's going to track that. And then below that, it's going to ask if you want to track the additions in detail. Again, I feel like anywhere you can track detail, you should, but that's certainly up to you whether or not you want to track it in detail. So once you have this set, from this point forward, it is going to start tracking that information. And then in the report section of Accounts Receivable, there's actually a customer audit report. And by looking at that report, it is going to show you all of the additions, changes, or deletions that have occurred within your customer master file. There's a couple of reasons that I can think of as to why that can be helpful. Number one, maybe you have your AR staff is charged with, when you set up a new customer, you must always complete their address. You must always get a contact person and that contact person's email address. And, maybe we always need to make sure we have a phone number in the system. And you keep finding that customers are being set up and there's no phone number, and you're trying to figure out who on your staff is not following protocol. Well, if you run that report, it's going to show you who set up the customer. It's also going to give the user ID that set it up so that you can look for a pattern, and maybe you have one particular person that's just not taking the time to gather all the details that are required when they set up that customer. Another example would be, let's say a customer gives you a change of address. You go in and change it, and the customer contacts you within a month or two and says, you're still sending my mail and my invoices to my old address. You go in and you check, and you're like, well, I changed somebody, but I don't remember who I changed. Obviously, I changed the wrong customer. So you could go in and then run a report and see what customer that you accidentally changed by accident. The other piece of this that's really nice is when you're making a change, it shows you what the original field is and then what you changed it to. So it would actually show you what that customer's old address was so that you could change it back and not have to look it up. This audit tracking is available in several modules. And the concept works the same way that you have a report. So just as reference, you have it for your vendors, you have it for your inventory items, you have it in the general ledger. So there's various places where you do have an audit report and you can track that information. Next, we're going to move to the areas where you can, again, determine how long you want to retain history. This next item is cash receipts history, and this is not days, but years. And so you can determine how many years you want to track history. The maximum number is 99. The minimum number, as I set that to 1, the minimum number, it cannot be less than 2 years. So you can decide to keep your cash receipts history between 2 and 99 years, And again, the period in processing in AR is what goes through the calculation and purges out that old history. You have your sales history, where you can, the number of years to retain customer history, and also the number of years to retain salesperson history. Again, I'm going to just change this to 1, and you'll see that I get a warning that it can't be less than 2 years, and I can also keep it up to 99 years. If you have this set at a low number and you have done period end and it's purged out too much history for your liking, you can go in and change this number to a higher number, but it's not going to bring that history back. So you do want to keep that in mind when you are setting these numbers. It's better to set it higher than what you think you need, so that you can always go in and change that number and purge out history, rather than purge history and then wish you had it back. Okay. So those are the things that I wanted to cover for you in the accounts receivable options in that first menu. I'm going to go ahead and click accept, and it will save my changes that I made to my settings. And the next thing that I want to talk about is in the setup is that we have miscellaneous item maintenance. Now, we talked earlier about the difference between sales order and accounts receivable. So let's just, for today's purposes, pretend that you don't have inventory and sales order, and you do all of your invoicing out of accounts receivable. When you're doing invoice data entry, you may want to track various things, whether it's a service. Maybe you do sell items, but you don't really track inventory. Maybe when a client makes a purchase, you actually order from your vendor, it comes into you, and then you turn around and ship it to your client. So you don't have a physical warehouse. But the client doesn't need to know that. They need to see the item number of what they're purchasing on their invoice. So miscellaneous item code maintenance is where you're going to track or set up a database of your item codes, whether it's an item or whether it is a charge code. We have charge codes and we have item codes, and you can also set up generic comments. So if there's a comment that you always want to put on an invoice based on a particular product line, you can create that comment and then just add it as a line item onto the invoice. So we're going to pull up a miscellaneous item first, just so that you can see how that is set up. And on a miscellaneous item, you're going to give it a description. You're going to, if you want, put in your unit price as well as your cost. And then also, if you are subject to charging sales tax, you can put in there, you can put in whether or not this item is taxable. You can put in a sale or a purchase unit of measure if you have the sales order and the purchase order module. You can also put in the sales unit of measure with accounts if you're just using accounts receivable. And then you also, if you do have sales order and purchase order, you can also say whether or not you want these miscellaneous items to be available if you're doing entry through those modules. You also can say whether or not this item is subject to a commission. So if you're tracking salesperson commissions, you can also say on a miscellaneous item by item basis whether or not you're going to pay commission. If I pull up a miscellaneous charge, you basically still have the same information, but it's more of a miscellaneous charge is more of a flat fee. So with an item code, it's more of, you can have a quantity, I'm ordering 3 widgets at $10 a piece, versus a charge code may be, you know, a charge code could be the shipping that you're charging if you want to track it that way on the invoice versus breaking it out on the freight line. It could be an assembly fee. It could be a core charge, anything like that where it's more of a lump sum versus a quantity times a cost. And then a comment code is where you can give it a description. This example doesn't have one. And also you can say in what modules that it's used. And then you can put in a text comment. And if you're keying an invoice in AR and I tell it I want to use the item CO1, it actually drops in this field so that you don't have to manually type it every time. And I do want to go back and show you something else on the miscellaneous item. Basically, I just showed you the main screen a moment ago, but you also have your accounts tab, and this is where you will put in your GL accounts that are applicable to this item. And then also you have a history tab where you can take a look at the history of how many of these miscellaneous items that you've sold, how many have been returned. You can also look at your sales, and if you are linking it to the purchase order, you can look to see how many you've received as well. So I wanted to go through and show you those items and kind of discuss that miscellaneous item maintenance. So miscellaneous item maintenance actually exists in several modules. So you only have to set it up once. So if you set it up here and tell it that you want it to be able to be used in sales order and purchase order, then when you're doing the sales order setup, you don't have to go in and set it up again. Or when you're doing the purchase order setup, those item codes are already going to exist. So I wanted to show you that. We have some individuals that they don't want to track all of those various items, so they may just have a generic item code and they change the description each time they sell something. So it's really up to you how you want to utilize that. If pulling sales reports are important to you, and in making that determination. Okay. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to leave the setup area and we're going to go into the main menu on Accounts Receivable, and we're going to look at Customer Maintenance. One of the things that I want to show you is that in the newer versions, starting in, I believe, the 2017 version, they now have the Autofill feature. So you always had the ability to do a lookup, start typing the customer name and then click on the magnifying glass and do a lookup, or start the name and hit your F2 key, which is also the shortcut key for the magnifying glass. But now it has autofill. So as you're typing in the name, any customer that I have that starts with AM, it would show them all listed in a box, and I could choose which one I wanted to use. So let me see if I have anybody that, I'll just start with the letter C. And then you can see anybody that starts with C will show up there. If I know it's custom, I could type in CU, and any customers that started with CU would also show up there. So if you select that customer, then I'm just going to hit my tab key, and then it's going to fill in that information. So it's just kind of a shortcut where it saves an extra step from having to do that lookup, or actually go into the lookup engine and change how you want to look things up. So if you're looking at the main tab for a customer, down here is where they have a credit limit. So in this scenario, I am tracking and assigning credit limits to my customers. So this is where that credit limit will go. And then you also can change that as, as need be. And then also you have the option of putting a customer on credit hold. And what that will do is if a customer is on credit hold, then you can have it, if somebody goes in to do a sales order or somebody goes in to do an invoice, whether it's an AR or sales order, it's going to pop up and let you know that they're on credit hold. And in order to bypass that, you're going to have permissions to go ahead and sell them something if they are on credit hold. So this may be used in a situation, maybe you're in a collection situation with a client and they've, you keep calling them for payment and they're not being responsive. So you want to make sure that no one sells them anything else and that they are on credit hold. So you can do that. And then the little icon here for the credit check is actually a link to be able to go out to a service and do a credit check on a client. So I don't know if when you get a new customer, if you do a credit check on them before determining what their credit limit should be or something like that. It is a paid service, but it is just something that's built into the system if you want to use that. Okay. So we've talked about the on hold and we've talked about the credit limits. The next thing that I want to talk about is the little memo button right here. And this is where you can set up custom memos on a customer by customer basis. So if this little memo is kind of blank, plain looking here, it means that that this customer has no memos associated with them. I'm going to go back to another customer and see how this is yellow. This indicates to me as soon as I look at this customer that there is some type of a memo out there. So if I click on this, I can see that they have several different memo codes associated with this customer. Again, if I move to another customer, I'll see that they have no memo codes, and when I click on it, it basically saying, okay, let's add a new code. So there's lots of different things that you can, or reasons why you can utilize this, but I'm going to tell you one that I suggest, and this is actually, we utilize this internally with Oasis, is that we manage our collections by using this memo code. So again, I'm just going to give you an example of how we do it, but you can see the versatility of being able to use this functionality. So let's say that I needed to call Allen's Appliance and because they have a past due invoice. And I go in here and I notice there are no codes, no memo codes, so I've never called them before. What we use is actually the year. So then I can go into a customer here in my Sage system and I can look and go back, and if I see codes that say 2012, 2013 and so forth, I know that typically we've had collection calls with them each of those years. If I go in and look at a customer that we've had for 20 years and all I see is something that says 2008, then I know that we haven't had any collection activity with them for the past 10 years. So the key to this is if you're wanting to be able to use this for reporting purposes, which I'll show you in a few minutes, and for more consistent tracking, use the same code for each customer. So if I'm calling Allen Appliance and doing a collection call to them, and then I'm moving on to the next customer on the list, and they do not have a collection code set up, I'm also going to call it 2018 because these codes are customer by customer. So, and I'll give you an example of why I do it that way in a few minutes. So I might just put collection calls in the code. The memo date is going to default to today's date. I can also have this memo pop up all the time, so that if I say always, which can be kind of a pain, if I go into customer maintenance, if I go in to do an invoice for them, if I go in to run a statement for them, I go in and look at history, it's going to pop up. Or I can have it set to never, and I can run reports based on the dates that I'm going to put in here. So I'm going to put a note in, and I'm going to say, and this is just a free form text field. Okay. So I'm basically going to type in my notes. I like to put in the date. I like to say who I spoke with, what invoices that I'm calling about, and you know, a lot of times the person will say, well, you know, I don't recall receiving that invoice. Can you send me another copy? So I just make a note that I sent them the copy and of the invoice. So I just note it there. I'm going to click accept, and I'm going to exit out of here. And now you notice that that button has turned yellow. So if I click on that, you're going to see that this memo code exists. So let's say I don't get the payment on the 20th and I have to call them back. When I call them back, I'm going to utilize the same code, and then I like to keep the most recent date at the top. So I just did a carriage return, and then just say 6/21, called again, and then a brief description. If I want to set up a reminder date that you know, they are supposed to pay, I should have this payment by June 30th. So I'll just say, actually, let me change that. If they're going to mail it on the 21st, then between the 25th and the 30th, I should have that check. So I'm going to just set this reminder date. I'm going to click accept. And then I'm going to move on, you know, to my next person and make that call. If I want to take a look at everybody that's promised me payment that week of the 25th, what I will do is in Accounts Receivable, I'm going to go to Reports. I'm going to go to Customer Memo Printing. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say I want to do it if the memo code is equal to 2018, and if it has a reminder date, I could do between, I could do a range, so I could say, the way that I set the example up to do it exact would be equal to 6/25, and then an ending date equal to 6/30. Normally what I would do is probably do a range there of the whole week. And then I'm going to preview this report. And anything that has that code and within those dates, it's going to put on this report for me. So I may have 15 clients on this list. So this is just a way for me to keep track of who's promising me payments during the week. When a client does pay an invoice, I do not go in and remove any of the data. I still leave the information. I still leave that information there. Now, I may not have to call them again until December about another invoice. If I call them back in December, I'm going to add a line here, enter my notes, and I would change my reminder date. And also I can change my memo date as well to the current date. The other thing that I want to show you in here, which is in various areas of Sage, beginning with version 2018, is that they have actually implemented some spell check within Sage 100. So the Memo maintenance is one of the areas where they do have spell check. So if I'm typing, and I'll do 61718 called, and you'll notice how it's underlined in red. So it's determining that obviously that word is not in the dictionary that Sage is using. So if I can go here and I can right click, and it will give me selections, or I could say ignore it, or I can even add it to the dictionary. So if it's called, I'm going to click here, and then it's actually going to change that for me. So there's quite a few areas where they have implemented the spell check, or the spell check. It's not everywhere within Sage, but it's really nice to be able to do that. And it also, with your comments and so forth on invoices, you can do spell check with that. If you have user-defined fields like a multi-line field where you're typing in information in a multi-line field, you have spell check there and various other areas. But I did want to point out that spell check is now available in version 2018. Okay. So we've talked about the memos and we've talked about the spell check, and then you have taken a look at the report on how to do that. The other thing that you can do within a memo, which we don't have a need to do related to collections per se, but in any memo within the system, you can also attach a document. So trying to think of an example of why you might have one in customer maintenance for collections. Maybe the client has filed bankruptcy and you get a letter from their attorney indicating that they filed bankruptcy. You could scan that and then attach that to this record. You can, a better example is in accounts payable in the vendor memo maintenance. If they send you the W-9 form to say whether or not they're subject to a 1099, you can scan and attach that. So if you're audited and they want to see those forms, they're right in Sage, and you're not having to go and pull a vendor file. You can only add one attachment per memo code, but that is another feature that's available. And again, you have that functionality. You have memos codes that you can set up in GL, in AP and vendor maintenance, in inventory master file. So wanted to just show you that attachment as well. Okay. All right. Want to move along pretty quickly to talk to you about a couple of other things. We're not going to go through the actual functionality, but I want to make you aware that the functionality is there in case you are not utilizing it. One of the things that we want to talk about is under the main tab, you have repetitive invoice entry. And if you have things that you bill your customers for on a repetitive basis, maybe you have a service agreement that you bill your customers for a service agreement on a monthly basis, maybe monthly, quarterly, annually. You can actually set up that repetitive invoice so that basically what you're doing is you're setting up the template of the invoice. And then whenever it's time to, let me just grab one here and show you. So you're setting up the template, and you're also putting the line detail, what it is that they're purchasing. Each cycle, I guess let's step back. You give it a payment cycle. Now, in our demo data, it's actually giving it a number. We typically use something that's alpha related because it's maybe easier to keep track of. So if you wanted to bill somebody monthly, you may have a cycle of M. If you bill a client, some of your clients you'd only bill quarterly, you can put a cycle of Q. This one is basically they're doing it that they bill on the 15th of the month, so this is how they track which customers they want to generate an invoice for on the 15th of the month. So the concept of this is that you are setting up the template and having it in the system, and then in this instance, at the 15th of the month, you would go into the repetitive invoice selection and select a cycle that would be equal to 15. And if you wanted to do certain customer numbers or certain references, but then if you click proceed here, what it's actually going to do is it's going to create an invoice for you using this invoice number as the starting number, and it actually puts it in the invoice data entry. So it's just a way to, if you have 100 clients that you bill on the 15th of every month, you can set up the template once for each customer and then go through this process on the 15th, and it's really going to cut your data entry time down. So just wanted to make you aware that you do have that repetitive invoice feature in Accounts Receivable. For those of you that are attending this webinar, if you use sales order, there are also repeating orders and master order features in the sales order module that is basically the same concept. Learning about the differences in those, you could attend one of our sales order tips and tricks webinar, and we would be going through that as well. So, so we've talked about that, and the last thing that I want to touch base on very briefly is under Accounts Receivable are the utilities. Within the utilities, there are several areas where you can purge history, you can change or delete a customer. You could renumber a customer. That would be a change if your customer numbers are Alpha and Oasis changed their name to Sage, and you wanted to renumber us or change our name, that you can go through and do that through this through one of these utilities. There's a couple of things that I want to stress to you very strongly. Number one, you need to limit what employees on your staff even have access to do any of these activities. And you can also limit if you need to, they only can go in and purge a salesperson commission. And that's the only thing that they have access to do. And maybe only a supervisor has the ability to change or delete a customer out of the system. The reason that you want to be very careful in this area is that if you tell it to do something and you go through that whole process, then if you realize that you didn't mean to, if you accidentally merged improperly and merged all of your customer numbers into one, there is not an undo button. So you can't undo what you've done. The only way to fix that is to restore from a backup. So what I would suggest, if you're not familiar with any of these features and there's something that you need to do, give our help desk a call. We'll walk you through. We'll make sure that you know how to do it properly, and give you some extra warnings in there so that you don't accidentally merge a range of customers, delete customers that you didn't intend to delete, and we'll be glad to help you with that. So number one, before you do any of these utilities, make sure you have a good backup. Number two, make sure that only particular individuals that you trust, that have been trained and understand the ramifications of what they're doing, have permissions to do that. So the features work very well, but it is going to trust that you know what you're what you're doing, and if you say, I want to purge, then it is going to purge. So just be careful with that. There's utilities in most of the modules within Sage, so you also want to make sure that that you're limiting who has access to that. So I want to show you one more thing, and then we'll be finishing our hour today, is that within this is also a global customer field change. So there are areas that you can go in and globally change for all or for a range of your customers. And a good example of that would be if you do have salespeople, and as I mentioned earlier, all customers have to be assigned a salesperson. So let's say your territories change, or let's say maybe a salesperson resigns and you have a new salesperson come in. Instead of having to go through 1,000 customers and figure out which one, Bob Smith was assigned to, you could go in and just say, I want to change the salesperson, and I don't have that set up right at the moment, but I want to change the salesperson, and if that salesperson is this person, then I want you to change it to this person. And then when you proceed, it's going to go through all of your customers, and any customer that has a salesperson equal to this, it's going to change to this. You could, if you charge finance charges, or maybe you have it set up to charge finance charges, but you never have, and the default is 0, and you want everybody that gets a finance charge to be 3%, then you could change that as well, and it will do a global change. Only the fields that are listed here can be changed globally. If there are other fields that you need to change for any reason, then that could be done using Visual Integrator, doing an import into the system to actually make those changes. So I would like to thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions or you need any assistance with Accounts Receivable or with your Sage 100 in general, please feel free to reach out to our tech support team, and they can be reached at techsupport@oasisky.com. They also can be reached by calling area code 502-429-6902 extension 227. So thank you for attending today. Please feel free to check out our website for other recordings of various modules, and we do offer presentations on a monthly basis. So thank you for attending today.